Welcome to Back to the Texts Themselves, a series on phenomenology. Today's video examines sections 43 and 44 of Heidegger's Being and Time. The release of the original Matrix film in 1999 was quite an event for many, all the more so for me as a first-year college student who was discovering philosophy for the first time. It tapped into those sensibilities concerned with discovering the truth behind appearance and the quest for self-knowledge. Reality, I believe then, was hidden beneath the surface experiences that cover over our eyes, blinding us to the truth of our existence. It wasn't until much later that I came to realize how deeply problematic these philosophical ideas attributed to the Matrix are. The difficulty is not with the claim that one's everyday experiences are a neural interactive simulation or computer-generated dream world. Rather, it's the very definitions of reality and truth that are imputed onto this film. At the same time, we can also find how the film may be interpreted in a manner that also converges with some themes in Being and Time. And for this reason, I talk about attributions and imputations upon the film rather than what the film necessarily intends in itself. In this first video dedicated to sections 43 and 44, I'll take up the historical context for the prominent philosophical ideas concerning reality and truth. The second video will take up Heidegger's more constructive proposal to the traditional philosophical issues surrounding these notions. Throughout these videos, I'll make references to the Matrix films to illustrate key points I'm making throughout. And so, in this video, I will address the following questions. 1. What is the problem of reality? 2. What is the correspondence theory of truth? And 3. How are the traditional philosophical responses to reality and truth problematic for Heidegger? Section 43 concerns the problem of reality. Why is it a problem? It's because there have been recalcitrant difficulties in proving that the real world exists outside my mind. A related issue is the epistemological question about the possibility of whether I could ever know what is real. Of course, the problem of reality is of central importance to the Matrix. The world we know is in fact a computer simulation, whereas the real world is a desolate, post-apocalyptic landscape set well in the future of the simulated world. However, in the subsequent films, we come to realize that perhaps what is now understood to be the real world may also be, to some degree at least, a part of the system that Neo and others thought they escaped from. The boundaries between simulation and real world is further blurred when we come to discover that Neo is capable of affecting the machines in the real world, and that programs, such as Agent Smith from the Matrix, can take on a life outside of that Matrix. As such, the problem of reality is never fully resolved within these films. But is reality really a problem? And what are the origins of that problem, assuming it to be one? Though doubt concerning the existence of reality did not become a major theme in Western philosophical thought until the early modern period, questions concerning the nature and origin of reality have been present from the very inception of philosophy. The pre-Socratics are known for providing various responses to what the fundamental principle of reality consists of. It's Plato who is most associated with the classic distinction between appearance and reality, bringing together the ideas of Heraclitus and Parmenides concerning their views of reality as change and permanence, or becoming and being respectively, leading to Plato's development of the theory of forms. Reality then is bifurcated into the changing material world, accessible by the senses, and an unchanging, invisible world of abstract ideas, accessible by reason. Many have interpreted the Matrix to be rehashing this philosophical position, though unlike Plato, it's not clear we ever get at some eternal, unchanging thing in the film, and we certainly do not leave our bodies. If anything, it would seem that Neo and others discover reality by being in touch with their bodies for the first time, whereas the matrix is a product purely of the mind, which seems to invert the classic Platonic binary of mind body relations. Although Heidegger certainly has this early history in mind, his explicit critique is more so directed to recent thinkers, namely Rene Descartes and Immanuel Kant. With Descartes, we begin to find a concern not so much with the metaphysical question of what reality is, but instead how we know reality exists at all. The proof Descartes provides for the existence of reality is based upon the presence of consciousness itself. It's in fact thought that first necessitates my own existence. The thought is a doubt rigorously applied to all of reality up to the point that one can no longer doubt without entering into complete contradiction. And that limit of doubting is doubting itself, that is, one's thinking. However, what is more notable is how Descartes then moves from this to reestablishing the external world. Even though he is certain of himself as a thinking thing, he's yet unable to claim certainty for anything else until he establishes the thought of a perfect being. This clear and distinct idea could not have been created by me, and therefore the idea of this being, of God, must have been given to me and is therefore innate. Now, furthermore, using a logic reminiscent of Anselm's ontological argument, Descartes, in the fifth meditation, concludes that such a supremely perfect being entails a necessary existence for that being. And so, in demonstrating a necessary existence of a perfect being, and that such a perfect being therefore must not be a deceiver, Descartes is able to go on to demonstrate proof for a material reality independent of the mind. Important for our purposes here are not the details of such an argument, but the profound impact the method has had on subsequent thought and the new problems it created. First, now it becomes possible to doubt the existence of reality. Second, the proof for reality's existence can now be established by the mind of the knower, rather than be located in reality itself. Third, the mind contains innate ideas, like the idea of God, that reestablishes the certainty of the external world. Fourth, the classic metaphysical notion of substance is conceptualized in a novel manner. To quote Heidegger, substantiality becomes the basic characteristic of being. To understand why this emphasis on substance is important, we have to go back to Aristotle's notion of primary substances, which consisted of the essential properties of individual things. Now the notion of substance is truncated into only two distinct things: a non-physical thinking substance and a physical substance marked by its extension through space. So the essence of the hammer is not first thought in terms of its uniquely essential properties, that which makes a hammer a hammer. Instead, it is first thought in terms of what it shares with all physical things, with its materiality, its geometric coordinates, that is, its physical substance. Immanuel Kant is the other major target of Heidegger's analysis in section 43. Despite clear departures, Heidegger discerns in Kant a continuation of Descartes' line of thought by arguing that the consciousness of my existence proves the object's existence in space outside of me. Furthermore, this existence of things merely designates what Heidegger calls objective presence. Rather than innate ideas, we have the powers of cognition, including space and time, as forms of perception given through sensibility, as well as the categories of quality, quantity, relation, and modality given through the understanding. And so objects are a product of these forms and categories, giving rise to schemata that delivers a kind of certitude toward our knowledge of reality as it is experienced, that is, the phenomenal realm. Through my awareness of the change present in me, I come to know the persisting things outside of me. And so Kant, like Descartes before him, takes the subject, the in me, as the starting point for thought, as it is through the experience of time in the in me that I can leap into the outside of me. These positions by Descartes and Kant are classically identified as cases of idealism. Idealism is a metaphysical position that claims that reality is in some way fundamentally dependent upon the mind and modes of representing things. Realism, then, in this context, is the position that reality exists independent from our perceptions and our understanding of it. With Heidegger critiquing these idealist philosophies, one might understandably be led to think that he is promoting a form of realism instead. And this is especially in the case once we get into the idea of thrownness and the always already factical existence of the world. However, that is far from the case. The epistemological variant of realism still believes in proofs and attempts to demonstrate reality ontically. Instead, Heidegger upholds a kind of idealism to the degree it maintains the ontological difference that claims that beings cannot explain being. For this reason, we still find in Heidegger certain idealist terminology, such as the existential, the a priori, the transcendental. And yet, despite conferring upon idealism a kind of priority, it should not be confused with a psychological idealism which limits being and reality to consciousness. Such a form of idealism continues to leave unclarified the being of that consciousness itself. In section 44, Heidegger provides an analogous analysis of the traditional concept of truth, which he sets out to describe, demonstrating how it is derivative of something more primordial and clarifying the meaning of truth itself. Now, truth has a very close relationship to reality, being one of the most critical properties attributed to it. The correspondence theory is the most pervasive approach to truth, enduring in one form or another since the ancient Greek philosophers, and it continues to this day. Central to this theory is the notion of representation. A representation here is an image, symbol, or statement intended to reflect some aspect of reality. Though not necessarily conceived of as such, representations are usually thought of in terms of mental content. Truth, then, is a determination of how closely that mental representation agrees, converges, or correlates with the thing in reality. It is the adequation of things with the intellect. And the mind mirrors external reality to greater or lesser degrees of accuracy. Heidegger phrases it as involving a kind of relation between two things, the ideal content of the mind and the real thing objectively present. The ideal content is the abstract representation of the real thing. The relation of correspondences may be thought in terms of between, say, physical and psychical, knowledge and the objects of knowledge, or even sometimes between the contents of consciousness with other contents of consciousness. The central difficulty Heidegger identifies with these philosophical positions on reality and truth is that they make certain fundamental presuppositions, leading to a confused philosophical analysis concerning the divide between subject and object. One such presupposition is the defining of things in terms of objective presence. Unlike readiness to hand, in which we find Dasein always already involved with things, objective presence or present at hand presupposes the theoretical attitude as the most fundamental one. Several difficulties result from this. First, in attempting to prove the existence of the external world, there's a failure to distinguish the world of innerworldly beings that one is absorbed and taken care of, and the worldliness of the world that one is thrown into. In other words, there is the ignoring of the ontological difference as the ontic becomes both elevated as the one and only world, while also being truncated to a world that is merely present at hand, consisting of a collection of objects existing independent of the subject. Second, and perhaps more problematic, the traditional approaches to the problem of reality leave undefined the being of that being who proves and seeks proof for the existence of the world, and that being Dasein. Instead, we find in its place a worldless subject that now wonders how to prove its own existence, along with the existence of a world from which it is now alienated. And in proving its own existence, this subject is rendered objectively present as much as those objects are that it sets out to study. There is for Heidegger a more primordial situation that precedes any divide between subject and object and the attempts to prove the existence of reality. There is the meaning of that existence and the manner in which I find myself always already in the world I'm seeking to prove. In fact, reality only becomes a problem once I forget this primordial situation and instead abstract myself from this world. Consequently, the problem of reality is, in fact, a pseudo problem for Heidegger. But this may be confusing. Can't we legitimately raise the possibility of being mistaken about what is real? Indeed, we will soon see that discussing the notion of discovering and disclosedness, that truth can indeed be concealed and presented as something other than what it is, such as through dissembling and semblance. But this is different from the philosophical problem of reality. You can notice that in the discovery of the so-called real world in the Matrix movie, this is not founded upon Neo taking himself as the starting point, nor even by arriving at some logically sound statements that allows him to necessarily conclude about the nature and existence of reality. Instead, we hear,
"Unfortunately, no one can be told what the Matrix is. You have to see it for yourself."
Neo's discovery is an act of revealing, of unconcealing the truth, which has been covered over by what Neo has been told by others, by the they, his whole life. And even then, as we come to see in the sequels, the activity of uncovering does not stop upon the initial discovery, as more remains hidden and in need of uncovering. So, the Matrix is not really affirming the correspondence theory of truth either. The truth that Neo discovers is not the result of relating a representation to reality and then seeing how well they agree. So, despite the Matrix films often being portrayed as some modern rendition of classic philosophical ideas about reality and truth, it in fact has very little to say about these matters. Or, if anything, the Matrix films demonstrate quite well the problems with those traditional philosophical approaches. If Neo was a Cartesian or Kantian, he wouldn't even need to do anything to discover truth and reality, as he could simply turn toward his own thoughts and through systematic doubt or the transcendental method arrive at correct knowledge of his situation. Yet, that would probably make for a pretty boring movie. Instead of this, we find a character encountering angst before the overwhelming possibilities that had remained covered over for most his life. And instead of fleeing from those possibilities, he allows himself to confront the uncanniness of his prior world, as it now is unfamiliar to him. Now, ultimately, Neo discovers that he's the one, not through detached contemplation, but through taking care. In taking care of others and seeking to rescue Morpheus from the agents, more about himself is revealed. Furthermore, it's only because he was always already in a world in which he took care of things that he could have even operated in the world of the Matrix in the first place. In other words, his fallenness, so to speak, is itself part of the truth of his situation. And this will bring us to Heidegger's more primordial notion of truth, which we'll discuss in the next video when we take up part 2 of sections 43 and 44. I want to thank the following for supporting this channel on Patreon. If you wish to support this work on Patreon, the link is below in the description. You can also support this work by liking and sharing this video, as well as subscribing to my channel. As always, thank you for watching, and until next time, be well.